Hi, I'm Patrick Reid. I'm the Group CEO of Imagination. And these are my biggest lessons. Throw the dice when you're young. I think that young people, particularly now, are very focused on getting things right and not making a mistake. And whilst that's very admirable, I do think when you're young, you might not realize it, but you really do have to take opportunities. And even if things don't work out as you imagine, often it leads to other opportunities, or if it's a mistake, you do have the time to course correct. I learned this earlier in my career. After I left university, I was sort of pressured into going into accountancy. Didn't have a financial background, but I was pressured into doing that. And whilst it wasn't a wasted experience, because I learned a lot about how companies work, I knew that I wanted to be part of a creative company and create products and services. So I took a big gamble. I quit my job without having a job and came to London and started unpaid in a role at Imagination. And I've never looked back, and I really saw the value in taking a chance. I saw a similar thing happen when I was 24, when I was offered the opportunity to set up our office in Hong Kong. I had very little experience, full stop. I had no experience of setting up an office or running one. But again, absolutely grasped the opportunity. And it was a very sink or swim situation, but it gave me fantastic experiences in terms of living in a different culture, working in different environments, and really fantastic supercharging of my experience and knowledge. So I would advise people, drop the analysis paralysis and go for it, especially when you're young. So create unusual, sometimes magical combinations. This particularly applies to people and the teams that you build. I see a lot of companies where, and I can understand why, they have very distinct processes around the people that they hire and their backgrounds. We try and do the opposite here at Imagination, and I do that personally in terms of the teams that I surround myself with. And you can see, I believe, a lot stronger, more diverse and eclectic responses and more powerful outcomes when you do mix teams up. Here, a typical project for us could involve, stage managers, developers, ex-ballet dancers, script writers, etc. And we really do dial up that experimentation to get very, very powerful results. I've seen this with some of my clients that I've worked with. In the past, I worked on a number of projects with Prada, and I saw them using that to really great effect. I also believe this is something you can build on in your personal life. When you have a hobby, it's interesting if it's a very different environment to your work. For me personally, I have a pilot's license, and even though that isn't on the face of it connected to the work I do day to day, it does provide often unexpected insights when you least expect them. So that could be everything from how you present data, from a cockpit, to how that applies in terms of how you present to a client, through to how you deal with pressure and how you make decisions and assess a lot of data. You can always find something interesting and useful. So I would say to people who have a different background and have diverse experience, don't see that as something you should dial down or cover up. That's something that can really allow you to be an asset to the company and be have a real ability to connect the dots. EQ is as important as IQ. You obviously have to be smart, you have to be hardworking, but I think EQ, or having an emotional intelligence, is as important as having a strong IQ. You can see this happening in the experience economy. A lot of businesses are developing products and services that really do connect people in an emotional way and make them feel different or act differently. So we can see that's happening as a trend. You even see people such as the ex-governor of the Bank of England talking about where they would advise their children to invest their time. And he talks about the evolution of society from using your hands, let's say through agricultural revolution through to industrial revolution, then brain in the services economy. But increasingly, as AI takes over some of those roles, the real future is in around the emotional experience economy and really understanding what makes people tick. So I think there's a societal change there. Also in terms of business and you personally, how you operate at work, understanding what makes people tick, understanding people and relationships, so whether that's partners that you work with, whether that's suppliers, whether that's customers, really being able to see things from different perspectives, see different points of view, I think is really, really invaluable. My experiences in working in different cultures as well are useful, whether that's the Middle East or Asia. It does give you a different perspective which you can experiment with. But the overall lesson is emotional intelligence is really important. Businesses should be using it more. You should be using it more because it can pay huge dividends. It's never as good or as bad as it may seem. So as a leader, your role is to remain calm, remain focused on your long-term goals. And that doesn't mean you can't shift and change, and evolve and pivot as you go on, but you can't be dragged in hundreds of directions. I find that in the hyper-connected world we live in, there's a lot of demands on your time. There's so much content out there. So whilst you need to be aware of it, you can't let it drag you away from what's important. I know sometimes the highs seem really high, the lows seem really low, but you do have to develop a bit of a equilibrium. And indeed, I think as you go through life and through business, you've got to be able to stay true to what is important for you and your business. And if you're not a contrarian at sometimes, you're not going to get the best results, because sometimes you have to do what is different to the herd to get outsized results in whatever sector that may be. I found that, also setbacks, and I know some setbacks really are setbacks, but over a period of time, as I've gone through my career, I've seen that sometimes they have provided a new opportunity or perspective for learning. So whilst then some setbacks truly are setbacks, some really are valuable. On the flip side, when things are going really positively, I do think you also should, be aware that, stay sensitive to how you need to adjust and change as you go ahead. So don't get complacent is the message there. And you can do that in many ways. I have it where I always every day try and think about that, try and stay focused on the long-term goals. And I also do personal things, which work for me. And that's stuff like, I cycle to work and gives me a moment of perspective. I like listening to a lot of history, which does, put the day to day, I suppose, in a little bit more perspective when you're hearing about things that happen, maybe years or, hundreds of years or thousands of years ago. So I would say stay true to your long-term goals, be flexible, but don't get pulled in 1,000 directions. Don't lose sight of things that are currently smaller. It's natural that when you get promoted or as your career develops, you tend to look at bigger problems, bigger opportunities, or be responsible for bigger parts of the business. And typically you're in businesses where you've developed experience around that business. So while that's all great and there's a gravitational pull, an almost natural law that makes that likely to happen, you really need to stay focused on the things that are currently smaller. So the businesses that are very, very currently insignificant, or the ideas, or the rising stars within your company. As a leader, you're in a pretty unique position in that, yes, you need to be all over the big stuff, but pretty much you alone can look after the things that are smaller now, which aren't part of the current core business. And for me, that's the real innovator's dilemma. You have to go in, you have to protect these things, because nothing turns up as a new idea or a new business that's currently, fully formed, or that's, quote, better than the existing business. And you can see a lot of examples of this in the business world, whether it's, Kodak or, not spotting digital cameras, or actually spotting it, but then not protecting it against the rest of the business. You can see that, obviously there's things like Blockbuster, which are well quoted. And I suppose in some ways as well, the more traditional automakers not being as fast on the electric revolution. So I believe it's the job of a leader to really make sure that you protect these new ideas, give them the breathing space, and allow them to flourish. And at Imagination, we're trying to do this by supporting all sorts of ideas, nascent businesses, whatever they may be, putting either capital behind them or putting time behind them, as long as they have a creative heart to them, to try and allow them to flourish and evolve, because those are going to be the stars of the future. And for most businesses, it's not going to be necessarily the business, but there's a lot of good opportunity you can capture if you do look at the smaller things as well as the bigger things.